Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to be really diving deep into the spiritual leg. And as we reflected on this leg, we thought, well, gosh, should we bring a guest in? What should we do as far as that spiritual component to really bring it home for people? And we just decided it was best that we just tell our stories and talk about our spiritual journeys as a professional shaman and professional medium, and talk about what we experienced through our healing and what brought us back home to ourselves. I think this is going to be really fun to share.
Absolutely. I feel a little bit nervous too. I'm like,
I am too, a little bit.
Like it's kind of vulnerable to be
It is
able to share that, but I know that's where vulnerability grows, is, we can help and bring forth the most healing in messages when we are vulnerable. And so it's just remembering that vulnerability is a good thing.
Welcome to Modern Sages Podcast.
I'm Jenn Gilbreth.
And I'm Candace Coons.
With over 25 years combined, we have delivered messages from beyond,
explored ancient healing wisdom, and integrated these profound teachings into our everyday life.
We are passionate about creating new ways of being human in the modern age by integrating the wisdom of the past with the present and coming into remembrance of who we truly are.
Are you ready to change your relationship to life itself? If the answer is yes, your journey begins now.
But before we get started, I wanted to show you what we're drinking. And today I have something that's called Cinnamonate. So it's a combination. It has yerba mate and cinnamon, and there's a couple other amazing ingredients, but those are the two that kind of really draw me in to what it is. Yerba mate it's like a natural caffeine, so it helps with digestion. It helps enhance your energy levels, as well as helping with sugar cravings. So I'm on this protocol right now where I'm not drinking any caffeine. And so this is a great boost to kind of help get rid of the sugar cravings, as well as kind of boost the energy, since I'm not having caffeine right now.
Yes, yerba mate is so good. I love it.
So good.
And cinnamon's my favorite spice. Personally, I love, love, love the taste of cinnamon, the smell of cinnamon. And it has so many amazing medicinal qualities. It helps balance blood sugar levels. So people who are diabetic or people who are hypoglycemic would really benefit from cinnamon. It has anti-inflammatory benefits, antioxidant benefits. The list actually goes on and on. I remember I was looking up earlier, and there was at least a dozen different health benefits that you get from cinnamon. So it's a wonderful, wonderful herb. And it comes from a tree. Cinnamon, of course, is a bark from the tree, which is cool.
I didn't even think about that before.
Yeah.
But yeah, because even the cinnamon sticks last time that we used in our golden turmeric tea, you use that too. So that's cool.
Yep.
I don't know why I didn't think about that.
I didn't really think about it either, to tell you the truth. And then I saw a picture of the cinnamon tree. I'm like, of course. Okay. Yeah. Of course.
That totally makes sense.
We're approaching this podcast slightly different from our last ones. We're doing it remote. So I'm actually speaking with you from my farm in Torrey, Utah. And Jen's up north in the Salt Lake area. So this is our first remote podcast show. And so I'm really excited about it because this makes us mobile. This means that we can continue to provide these shows for our fans, family, and friends. And we can be anywhere and do it. So I feel like this is such a freedom, to be able to do it this way. And I'm really excited about what we are exploring today. Because when we talked earlier about the multidimensional self, we talked about the four legs of the table and how it's important to establish balance physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Those are the four legs. Because when we establish balance, we can hold life's bounty in our lives. And when we are out of balance with those four areas, it's hard to maintain that balance and also maintain the bounty that is given to us, because we are here to be human, even though we are spirit. So it's important that we embrace the whole experience. Great. So let's go ahead and just dive in. I cannot wait to just get this party started. So how about you go ahead and start, Jenn, telling me a little bit about, again, your background, and let's just start from there and talk about your background and when you started to notice that you have gifts of spirit, that you could
Absolutely.
see people on the other side of the veil.
Ever since I was little, I have felt people around me, and it was more so of a feeling my whole life. It was kind of like I didn't know why I was feeling things. I just knew that I was. And I remember just feeling like I was constantly being watched. And as a child, it's a little bit intimidating and a little bit nerve wracking to feel like, okay, I'm being watched. Who's watching me? Why am I being watched? And I just remember like having so much anxiety as a little child. I would get major headaches. I had probably 4 to 5 headaches a week that were like really severe headaches. And I was nervous. I was anxious. There was so many things going on inside of me that I didn't necessarily know how to comprehend or how to move through it. And that was up until about like probably 8th grade that it was pretty severe in that space. My parents, I'm so grateful for my parents because they took me to the Western doctors. We did a lot of MRIs, CAT scans. We did so many different things to figure out why I had these severe headaches. I went to a chiropractor. I went to a physical therapist. I did all the things that I could. And at one point, my mom was like, you know what? We just need to take it more of a different approach. And so I started going to get acupuncture when I was in 7th grade. And then, even in elementary school, when I would get these headaches, I would go to the nurse's office and they knew me by name. They're like, hi, Jenny. And they would give me some medicine, let me lay down, put a washcloth on my head, probably 3 times a week at school. And finally, my mom's like, okay, we got to try something else. So I started listening to a color meditation when I was little. So I would put this wet washcloth on my head instead of taking Tylenol, because of course you don't take Tylenol that often throughout the week, especially as a young child. And every time I would just sit there, I would listen to the meditation with the little tape player and the headphones.
Yep.
And just lay there and listen to it. And I would fall asleep for a little bit and I'd wake up and then it was gone. And so that was like kind of my first interaction really with meditation. It was all about colors, about the cocoon, about butterfly, kind of letting color lead where maybe your body had holes or energetically you were drained, kind of help clear that out. And I'm so grateful that my parents stood by me in that space and helped me kind of navigate through that. And then leading into junior high and high school, I started having kind of like, I guess you could say paranormal activity. I don't really like to call it that, but I would be maybe getting ready in the morning and all of a sudden the door would swing wide open and I could feel someone physically, like if you were to close your eyes and have someone walk into the room, you could feel their energy walk in, even if your eyes were closed. It was happening to me and my eyes were open and there was nobody there. And so it was a little bit intimidating, as you could imagine. I'm like, okay, that's different. That's interesting. And then all my friends, even when I was little, like in junior high and in elementary school, we'd be hanging out or playing and I'd be like, oh, we can't go over there. There's an old lady there, or there's a kid in a tree here. There's someone here. There's this and this. And I was just always talking about things and they just thought it was kind of a normal, I don't know, like a normal part of who I was. And even one of my childhood best friends, we hadn't been in communication for a while. And then she reached out and was like, hey, I would love a session. And so she came over and we were just talking and she was laughing. She's like, now that I think about it, you were always talking about this stuff, even at like the age of 6. I would always talk about different things like that. And so it was kind of fun to come full circle with her. She was like, this is totally what you've been doing your whole life and not even knowing it. And so I feel like I think about 8th grade, I believe it was, my grandfather passed away. And I remember being so drawn to what he was experiencing on the other side. And it was almost like I knew exactly what he was going through and what he was feeling and what he was saying without even fully understanding or knowing why I felt that. And it kind of terrified me because I was like, why do I feel so drawn to this? I don't want to cross over. I'm not ready to go, but I'm so drawn to what's going on. And at that point, my dad had been talking about this book called Return from Tomorrow, which is a man who was in the service and he passed away, and he had his experience, like a out of body and near death experience. And then he came back. And I just sat there like so mesmerized at such a young age. And I just started reading books about, near death experiences, what people experienced. And it just kind of has been part of my experience this whole time. When I was in high school, I had a really good friend whose mom passed away. And for whatever reason, I felt like I could just feel her around me a lot. And I could feel, maybe what she wanted to relay to me or different things like that. And this is part of the journey of stepping into spiritual gifts as well, is it's kind of like when you're getting started into this space, you don't necessarily know how to navigate through it. And you don't know the best way to share these things and to move these things and to talk about these things as well. And so that was like a whole nother learning curve all in of itself. But, I felt like she came to me in dreams, or I'd be like reading my scriptures and I'd feel her like right by me. And so it kind of opened up the way to be a little more open to just knowing that people were there on the other side, and kind of just trusting in that process. And it actually wasn't until after high school, I had a couple experiences with her and maybe some other ancestors that I knew that was going on, but I wasn't it kind of freaked me out a little, like, well, I can't do that. And of course, I grew up in like the LDS faith, which is very much so, it's not as talked about. And in fact, not a lot of people are open to it, which I understand completely in all aspects. I've looked at it from all different angles. And so it kind of was something that I didn't give myself permission to fully experience, only because I was worried that I was going against God's will, or I was going against, I don't know, what I had always been taught. And it was very painful. It was a very heavy experience to be navigating through that, where it was like, this is just naturally part of who I am, but it goes against everything that I thought. It went against everything that I had experienced growing up. And it's so interesting because I ended up actually going to China to teach English after high school for 4.5 months.
Wow.
And during that time, I had a lot of worries, doubts, fears, a lot of confusion step in. And I have an older brother who has very similar gifts. But he called me when I got home and he was like, "Hey, I have a message for you." I'm like, what the heck is he talking about? So I go over and I'm sitting on his couch and he's like, "Grandma Case has a message for you." It's like, okay, I should already know about all this because, I've experienced it already. And so I just sat there and I hadn't talked to him. In fact, I was all the way across in China and didn't speak to him that often. And in this message that he read me, it was every single thing I've been worrying about, doubting, fearing. All of it was addressed in that one letter. And it was at that moment that I came to this space of, wow, this can be such a powerful gift if it's used in the correct ways. And he gave me that space and showed me that this has been a gift that's run down our family line for generations and generations. And I feel like when it comes to spiritual gifts in general, all of us have the ability, all of us are connected, all of us have that space to receive guidance, to receive inspiration. But it's once we give ourselves permission to trust that we can do that, is when our gifts really start to open. And at that moment, I said, okay, I'm going to trust this. I'm just going to jump in and see what happens and how it comes and how it goes. And that was kind of the launching pad, was that message that my brother gave me, and really giving me permission to kind of step into that.
That just had, so much courage. My goodness. Like I think about when I am connecting with spirit, and then right before you share that message, especially in the beginning when you're trying to gain confidence and courage to share these messages, it is like jumping off a high dive into the clouds. Like
It
you
is
just
so
really
scary.
don't, it is super scary. Because you're not going to get validation. You just have to trust. I mean, you might get validation from them, but I'm saying you don't get validation before you deliver the message. It's not like before you say, yeah, for sure, this is correct. So before I deliver the message,
Yeah, you're just
you really put
trusting.
yourself, really put yourself out there, and also the fears that come up. It's like, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm not, what if this doesn't resonate with this person? What if they say they don't understand what I'm saying, or they're not sure who I'm talking about? And you learn over time that you are a messenger.
Yes.
And that you are just supposed to trust the message, and however it comes out, it'll come out. And then maybe tomorrow, the next day after that, they'll find out they really did have Uncle George, or they had this who came through, or all of a sudden this message will make sense to them, and then it will unfold in the way that it's supposed to, because it's the messages that come through a spirit are needed.
Absolutely.
They really are exactly what you need to hear at this time in order to move forward. That validation for me as a healer has come through again and again. And I love the way that you mentioned that earlier, that even when you got the message from your brother, you weren't expecting it, but it was everything. It addressed every fear and question that you had. And that makes you realize that this work is super sacred.
Very
that you're
sacred.
doing.
Yeah. And it can be taken, if it's not in the right context, it can be taken not as healing as you think it could be, as well as like, that was one of the processes, is learning how to trust what was coming forward and how things happened, and how our ancestors and how the gifts of the spirit really worked for me. But it was also, I learned that you cannot deliver a message unless somebody is open to it. And so for me, I feel like that's part of being a light worker, is receiving the permission to deliver the message. Because if you give it to someone and they're not open or they're not ready, I feel like it can cause more heaviness than healing. And that's not the purpose of using gifts of the spirit, is to bring heaviness or to have power over somebody. It's really to help enhance, but to also have people not rely upon you for answers as well. So there's a fine balance in that. And getting started, I learned the hard way about, what my boundaries were, what my call was, what the boundaries were that I wanted to work in, what my message was in the space of how I wanted to share, and the boundaries that I didn't want to cross. And I feel like that's such an important lesson, is like, especially starting into spiritual gifts, is I even have a journal that I had when I was getting started. And I first kind of started with automatic writing, which I think is an amazing place to start. And then I look back now and I'm like, what was I thinking? Like, that was not totally aligned. But I look back and I've had to go through time and time again of like healing that space of like, instead of feeling like almost shamed, or instead of feeling like, what was I thinking? It was more so, wow, I can't believe how courageous that I was for just giving it a go and starting. And of course, where I was 5 years ago, starting to do sessions is totally different from where I'm at now. And I'm sure in 5 years, I'll be like, I'm in a total different space. What was I thinking? But at the same time, I had to do a lot of inner work. And I remember one night just sitting and reading that, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is bringing up so many wounds of getting started, of people rejecting me, people I loved and cared about so immensely that didn't understand, who cut me out of their lives, different things like that, who made me wrong. It brought up a lot of emotions, but that's the beauty of it as well. As I sat there and I just wrote a note to this, who I was back then. And I was just like, Jenny, you're so brave. Even though you didn't fully understand what was happening or what you were going through, you still showed up and you still tried.
Exactly.
And healing the heaviness or the pain is so much more fulfilling when we can look back and say, I was just starting out. And yeah, maybe sometimes I was really off on a message and sometimes it was spot on. But it's the process of growing and the process of just trusting that as we dive into our gifts of spirit, it's really a trust fall. It's a trust fall for trusting our ancestors, God, our loved ones. It's a trust fall for trusting ourselves, that we can relay these messages of light. And also maybe when things don't go as well, is taking accountability and not having that shut you down. And that's when it came to me working with you, Candace, is, we actually had a session when I first got started. And I will always forever remember this, is I was doing like 3 or 4 a day, which I don't know how that's so much energy.
Well, that is a lot. Oh my goodness.
Way too much. But you had driven by and I was like, I got to go lay outside. And I literally laid in my parents' front yard, face down in the dirt. And I was just breathing in the dirt, and you drove by and I was like, oh, I hope this is not her. And then finally a little bit later, you came back and you parked and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing.
Oh, I don't even know why, because my thoughts when I saw you do that, that made total sense to me, because whenever I need to ground and center, like between sessions or after sessions, that's what I do. I love to go outside and connect with Mother Nature, and a lot of times go around walking barefoot on the grass if I can, if it's warm outside, and that is really, really grounding for me. So that made total sense to me to see you do. I'm like, yeah, that's what I do too. It's kind of a thing that helps me regain my center before a session. So it made total sense. That's what's so funny. I remember you mentioning like you're embarrassed. I was like, why? Like, I totally get it. Like, of course she was doing that.
Yeah, I love it. That was our first time meeting, was that session. And it was just so amazing. And I remember you feeling like, oh, we're going to work together somehow. Don't know how, but we'll work together.
I did a couple times. I told you that.
Yeah. And I just think it's so cool how like everything has its time and its season as well. And at that time I had just been deeply wounded. I started to do a blog, and I was going to school at BYU, Idaho. And I started doing a blog about gifts, about being a spirit medium, and kind of just really trying to step into that. And interesting. I'm like having this download of information for myself as we're speaking about writing, because that was where I got so wounded. Was I was sharing my story, I was sharing my experiences, just really trying to understand myself, but also bring awareness. And I had a church leader call me in, and he said some things that he didn't take time to understand who I was, what my purpose was, where my heart was at. And it made me feel so afraid and so alone. And so wounded. And it almost made me angry at God a little bit. Like, how dare you give me a gift and place me in a place and place me in an organization and a religion that will never see me, that doesn't accept this. Like, how dare you do that? And I was so mad. And I literally, after that interview, I moved home. I quit school in the middle of semester, and I moved home. And it was almost like, I'll prove you wrong. And I just like jumped in after that. Like, I was like, I'm not going to work. I'm just going to do this full time. And this is my space. But I carried those deep wounds with me after that. And I tried to overcompensate, like by saying like, oh, like I just was overcompensating for myself, like trying to kind of navigate through those painful experiences and that painful heaviness, which was just adding into when I got started, having some loved ones who I cared so dearly about were like, we're not going to support you in this. Luckily, my family's always been super supportive, but it just felt like there was a lot of scary things jumping in and not being heard and kind of feeling rejected. And, finally, as I got married, my husband luckily is extremely supportive. His father has passed. And so before we even got engaged, I had a session with him, and he's had so much immense healing that I am so grateful that I have him in my corner to help bring that support, because there's a lot to it. And, And like a year into our marriage, I had another painful experience with spiritual gifts where I just felt like I was like, I can't keep doing this. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm so closed off. I don't know how to, I don't know. It's so rewarding, but I'm stuck. And then I remember you posted online, like, hey, I'm starting to take new students again. And you tagged me in it. And I was like, no way. This is the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we got on a call, we started talking, and you asked me all these questions about stepping into shamanism or like kind of learning more about the beauty way. And I remember not even knowing what I was getting myself into. I was like,
just again, trusting the spirit and the divine timing and jumping right in like you always do.
Yeah, I needed it. I needed it. And I was so wounded by religion. I was wounded by people in sessions. I was wounded by past loved ones. It was like all this wounding was just building up. And going throughout this process with you and really connecting into the ancient healing wisdom has transformed and changed my life and has helped me work through deep wounds of religion and help me gain more trust and confidence within myself to be able to move forward. It's been such a beautiful spiritual journey that I wouldn't have any other way. And it was very, very difficult. But you came in at just the right time to kind of help buoy me and like help me not shut down completely and to keep going.
Now you're going to make me cry. Well, thank you, Jenn, for sharing all of that. What a journey you've been on. Yeah. My goodness. And, you are such a beautiful, beautiful soul. You're so gifted in so many different ways. It always just blows my mind how multi-talented this woman is. I so appreciate you sharing like your wounds on this path, because I think people have this preconceived idea that when someone is as gifted as you and you come out and you provide these wonderful healing messages, that it must be just smooth sailing, that you're just brought to the situations and everything is perfect. And once you got courageous enough to embrace it, you didn't hit any stumbling stones or anything like that. And what happens, at least what I keep seeing in this repetition, is that when there's energy or wounds or things that are in our consciousness that are in the way of us coming fully into our gifts, they kind of like trickle up to the surface. And then we have these amazing teachers. I'm just going to say amazing teachers who come our ways that
absolutely
help us expose those shadows inside of ourselves so we can gain wisdom and extra strength and trust within ourselves and within spirit to move through that fire and get to the other side and find that we are so much stronger than we thought we were, and that we can still trust ourselves. We can still trust our path and to move forward and to keep going and sharing our healing messages. And that's a testimony, of course, to your strength of spirit and your tenacity and your heart and the love that you carry, because a lot of people who would have come to that situation would have known how to deal with that, and they would have ran for the hills and there would have been no turning back at that point. But the fact that you did come across these areas where you had to really look into, not only those were your fears, things that happened to you, those were actually like the manifestation of some of the fears that you had of not being accepted in your community and your faith, for people not truly seeing the love and the spirit that's behind your gifts. Coming across a difficult lady who you worked with that was really closed off and not being able to have someone receive the gifts that you're giving her. That was devastating. And yet for you to move through it and say, okay, well, now that I've faced that fear inside of myself, and what do I have to be afraid of? Now that I've faced those dark areas about my gifts, can I still move forward and heal? And can I still trust that these gifts have been given to me for a reason?
Yeah, it's interesting that you're pointing out too that your greatest fears if not looked at, will show up. But I also definitely know that like your greatest strengths are also your greatest weaknesses. And I have found, and we read that in the scriptures all the time, but I have found that that is such a key thing, is knowing that like I have a great strength in spiritual gifts and spirituality. Things just naturally make sense to me that I'm not as gifted in other areas, right? But that's also where I get the most wounded, or when I'm exhausted or drained or overwhelmed, I shut down there in my spiritual gifts and in my spirituality and in the way that I view things. It's like the lifeline of who I am. And if it's not balanced, it's gone. And I can't channel, I can't do this. I feel like I can't do all those things because that's not there. And so, it's not saying, oh, I'm better than anyone else. Of course, it's just saying that we all have these unique gifts. And when we're able to see them and to see how it can be a positive thing as well as it can hurt us, it kind of makes the life all the more enjoyable stepping into those gifts, even if it is hard at times to navigate through.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how do you feel? What has your spiritual gifts shown you as far as what do you believe now? I mean, with this combination of having a strong religious background,
Yeah.
and now connecting with spirit regularly and your spiritual healing path through shamanism, what have you learned? What are your beliefs now as you explore that? And how has that changed?
It's beautiful.
Through this journey of being a professional spirit medium?
So the first initial process to me was, okay, I'm receiving these messages and it's all of love. Every time our ancestors connect in, they never shame us. It's never about, you need to be doing this or this. Even if I'm working with someone who's an alcoholic, or someone who deals with major depression, or who's tried to commit suicide, right? Is our ancestors, they don't judge us. They want to help us heal. They want to help us be loved and guided. And that also goes for people of all different walks of faith. And that's what was really eye-opening to me, is that, whether or not someone was Christian or someone was Buddhist or someone maybe was more on the spiritual path, I found they were all in the exact same space on the other side, the same light. And it wasn't one above another. It was that they were all working together in different ways to bring healing. And that also comes across with maybe, maybe someone who has the same sex attraction, or maybe they were married to the same sex. They were seriously in the same place as someone who had been, like, as you could say in quotations, like a worthy Christian. And to me, that was so eye-opening because I had been taught differently in a lot of those ways. And so that kind of the combination of feeling like I had wounding taken place in religion, and then also seeing that there's so much more, it like definitely brought a space or like a gap. And I remember talking to you a lot about this and just feeling so torn. And I remember us both discovering through meditation and journey work that religion and spirituality and any kind of person's perception is exactly what they need. And that goes with Holy Scripture, Holy Text, is like, there's not one way to make it. There's not one way. There are so many different avenues that can bring healing and love. And ultimately, we talk about the Holy Scripture in all different areas, which I've been studying a lot more about, is like they all bring different ways of this God's love, of this Christ consciousness, Christ atonement, you could say, all of those things. It's all brought in together, just said and spoken differently. And yet we have so much division, but ultimately it's all saying the same thing, just different wording. The context is very similar. And so that's been a big eye-opener for me, is I don't feel like I'm as judgmental or as black and white, that it has to be one way, because there is there are times where maybe Christianity is extremely wounding for someone, and they might need to take a step back and do a lot more yoga or meditation, or give themselves space to connect into God, or to connect into the great creator in a different way. And none of that's bad and wrong, because we all came here to live our own unique spiritual journeys.
Yes.
And that's one thing that I stand by 100%, is like, no one should have the ability to tell anyone what their spiritual journey in this life is going to be, except for that individual. And I say that because I gave my power away so many times to other people. I could have taken away a whole lot of heartbreak if I would have learned to stand on my own and to trust my own space. And of course, that's a process. But I just know that there's so much good throughout the world. There's so much good in spiritual views, in different kinds of religions. Like, I don't feel like there's only one right way. And if we all believe in a loving God, God wouldn't only have one way for us to come home or come into remembrance of who we are.
Exactly. And really, it's about those Christ-like attributes that we are trying to cultivate through that remembrance. It's like coming back into remembrance of your true divinity, if that be the Christian faith way, or if that be the Buddhist way, or the Krishna faith, Hindu faith. If you're coming, whatever angle you're coming from, it's really about coming into remembrance of your divinity and cultivating that remembrance and those attributes that come with that remembrance into the physical world. Like, what does that look like?
Absolutely.
To be able to serve others, it should come from a place of love, of brotherhood and sisterhood. And that's talked about in the Hindu faith, that's talked about in the Buddhist faith, that's talked about in the Christian faith. It's talked about in religions all over the world.
Absolutely.
Why do we get so wrapped around the axle around language? Why do we get so caught there? Like, it has, like, we have monopoly. And this reminds me of a teacher that spoke the other day. What you were saying just kind of brought me back to this talk that she did. She's like, who are we to think as Christians that we have monopoly over Christ's teachings and cultivating the attributes of Christ energy or consciousness in the world? She's like, it shouldn't matter what faith you come to. If it's centered in love, hope, and healing, that's all that matters.
Absolutely.
That's all that matters. Everyone is your brothers and sisters. That's how we should embrace each other. And we are responsible for how we cultivate those gifts. At the end of the day, we're not responsible for what other people choose to do or say or use that information. We're in charge of our own decisions and choices. And I thought that was such a wonderful point, and it just so mirrored everything that you just said, because
Absolutely.
It's so true. And I love how Spirit showed you that, because it was, look, we're all together.
Yeah.
We were not in clubs here.
We're all navigating this human journey in these meat suits.
Yeah. And it's so centered in love.
It is. Yeah.
It's so centered in love. This work is so beautiful.
Well, and I have loved, because we've done a lot of journey work, which is like meditation, or how would you describe journey work to someone? How would you say that?
Oh, goodness. Well, I'll tell my students that you'll know when you are on a journey when you start to see what is happening, and it starts to take on it's almost like lucid dreaming in a way. It starts to take on its own life. For example, I'll be doing a guided visualization up to a certain point, and then I'll take in, let's say, to the sacred meadow or the different journeys that we do. And they will do something in that meadow. Maybe they touch the trunk of a tree. I notice the deep grooves that were in the trunk of that tree, in the bark. And I'll say, do you feel the bark? Do you feel the deep grooves that are inside of the trunk of the tree? Can you feel that? And when they see it and feel it first, and then I say it, not the other way around where I'm saying it and then they visualize it. It's the reverse. Then I know that they are in a different dimension with me. I know that they're there with me, that they are having an out-of-body experience and exploring that inner landscape or the multidimensional reality of themselves. That's when I know they're on it. So that's, I don't know if that really answers the question, because it's like, how do you explain a journey? Because a journey is an exploration of your multidimensional self. It's centered in healing.
Yeah. And
love and healing.
And that was a huge catalyst for me. And a lot of my healing was not looking to somebody else to give me the answers, which I feel like a lot of people, especially a lot of Christians, are like, you can't go to someone who does this kind of work because you're relying on them. And yes, you want to have set boundaries, of course, where you're not relying on one person to give you your answers, because that's only between you and God, or you and the creator, right? And this path was so perfect for me because you helped guide me into these journey works where we explored the Akashic records. We went to a lot of different places in which I was able to feel who God was in a way that was for me. And you didn't even go there with me. You led me to the space.
I led you, and then you did the rest.
Then you just said, here you go. And you just held sacred space. And then a lot of healing took place. And then afterward, we would talk about it so I could reintegrate what I had experienced and learn from it. And it was such a beautiful healing journey for me. And it still is, because it's really claiming back that power, that self-understanding that we are a multidimensional being. There is so much more to us than just this physical journey. And why would we be only limited to just this one journey when we could learn and we can grow and we can explore and we can expand? There's so much more out there than what we even understand or comprehend, which sometimes it's good to just focus on the day-to-day things, getting things or healing in this space and not worrying about past, present, future, just being here in the moment, but also knowing like that we have ancestors, we have guardians, we have guides, we have a high council who brings all this wisdom to us. We have the galactic family. We have past lives. We have so many things that we've explored.
So many things you can explore. It goes on and on and on.
Yeah, that have just brought so much healing. And I love that you're always like, hey, when it came to like past lives, you're like, hey, are you open to exploring this? And I'm like, well, I don't really know much about it, but I guess we can give it a go. And I've always heard a lot of people believe in past lives, but it could also be your ancestors' DNA or their genetics being passed down from their experience. So one way or another, right? It still is integrated within you. And we did some past life journey work too that really brought healing to me. And it was healing in a different way that I didn't know that I needed. And that was healing just as much as going to talk to like Jesus. So it's just amazing to see there's so many different forms of healing. And this has been such a beauty way of really helping me stand on my own and have that power and integration, which is what we're so about, Candace, is we want to help other people have that same space and do that healing work, do that journey work, and not rely on someone else to give them the answers. But to say, hey, here's the path, here's some tools. You can take it at whatever pace you want, but we're here to help you. We're not here to give you the answers. We're not here to tell you what to do. But hey, what about this? You view like this
Have
way.
You looked here?
Yeah. Have you considered the possibility of this and not push
you
it?
are capable of a lot of things. So I think that's one of the things, like when we're going back to how we do journeys, it's important that, and what I kind of look at it like this, like I'm handing you a key and you can either open the door or not, but I'm providing something for you that you can use again and again, a tool that you can use again and again for your healing and remembrance. And it's so funny because it's like when I talk to people about what we're going to be doing, they're like, oh, I couldn't possibly do that. I couldn't possibly, have that experience, and they would, and the first reaction or the habit would be to lean on me to go get that for them, to show that, like, take that from them, to take away that opportunity for them to really discover how powerful they are.
Right.
And the possibilities of exploring your multidimensional self, which is so exciting. And it's the truth for everybody. I don't have control over that truth. It just is, right?
Absolutely.
So I love that you mentioned that and brought that up, because there are certain healers that do it for other people. But the way that I felt I wanted to do it is, I want to, of course, lead you there, but I also want you to recognize the power that you have within yourself. I don't want you to feel like you have to lean on me in order to get the true answer, or to get the truth or access to the truth, because that truth is inside of every single person. Mm-hmm. And so it's such a profound healing path, because it brings you back to your center, and you don't even have to call it anything. I mean, why do we even have to call it anything, right? Truth is just truth. But coming back into yourself and knowing that you've got all of these tools and ways to do it
it's beautiful.
Is really exciting and fun too. It's a huge adventure. It's not all heavy and sad. It's like, did you notice that when you had these healing experiences, even if you saw something that could be perceived as heavy, what you took away from it was not heaviness. Yeah. It was like something about, because spirit always knows what you need. It always knows, like, what you need at that particular time to grow, to shift, to bring awareness. So if it brings you something that could be perceived on the outside as even heavy, there's something about you recognizing that opens something inside of you in some way, or brings some kind of wisdom or understanding for yourself. Did you notice that? Even if it was perceived kind of heavy, you didn't walk away feeling heavy. You walked away feeling empowered.
Yeah, because it's like, when we realize that we're not this physical form, we're not this identification of who we've decided that we are here, which is so funny, because today I was doing a channeling on YouTube, and it was about that, about over-identification and how we live in that space. And it was just so powerful, because even knowing that, like, that we aren't this journey, like, of course we're here, but it's not who we truly are. We're here to learn, and it gives us an eagle's eye view of this journey, and it makes it a little more bearable, that there's so much more hope and so much more faith and so much more joy that we can experience. It doesn't have to always be heavy. Now, of course, there are times where I'm just as human as anyone else, of course. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going through this, or not again. And I feel those emotions. I feel that heaviness. But because of the tools that I've been given, because of the tools that have been offered, I can move through it a lot easier, to come into remembrance of who I am quicker. And I love that aspect, because even Christ taught in parables. The glory of parables is that we could have 10 people in the room reading that same holy text and get totally different things for them, because they're into their own space. So even Christ taught the significance of going within to find healing, instead of always looking outward.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
So how do you feel your spiritual healing path has affected your personal relationships? How has that changed your relationships?
I think that it gives me, when I'm authentic about myself, which I still, sometimes I feel like kind of worried to fully express who I am, only because I have that fear of rejection, which I'm working on it. That's part of my healing journey. But it almost helps me feel more. There's a couple of things here. Is I can see someone's experience and see maybe if someone's wounding me because they're wounded. It kind of helps me see an eagle's eye view that it's not always about me. That maybe something that keeps coming up is maybe their insecurity or something that they're battling. and it has nothing to do with me. So I can't take it personally. But it also has really helped, like, even with my husband, it's really helped me and him explore each other and gain a better understanding of each other in a totally different way. And we can relate on a different level because we're able to say, hey, this is just this journey, like, this is just this physical moment, but we're so much more than that. And it almost brings more of a sweetness to relationships as well, where it's like, oh, okay, I want to be around this person because I have this physical journey with them and I want to love who they are completely without having to hold back all these heavy emotions. And of course, those still come up, but it's almost like delivering messages. You would be surprised at how many people maybe weren't in communication with their loved one who had passed, and he carried years and years and years of grief.
Yeah.
And it almost has really helped me see, why not be present? And I know a lot of people have this complaint about me is that I don't always reply back on messages, and I'm trying to get better. But when my grandma Burling passed, I was covered in guilt because every time she would talk to me, bless her heart, she would literally say the same 4 stories. Like, it was always, I could say it word for word. But whenever I was around her, she would start talking and I'd get on my phone and I'd start texting, or I'd get on social media and start scrolling. And it was after that that I decided, of course, I'm not perfect at this, but I want to be present when I'm with people. And so a lot of times I won't have my phone on me as much because I'm trying to be present with them. And that might make other people frustrated, or like, how can you text me back? I always try to in the time frame that I have, but also, why not be with our loved ones? Why not give ourselves the permission to connect to someone? Why not, instead of scrolling on social media, you sit with your kid and read? Or you go outside and jump on the trampoline with your child? Or maybe you decide, instead of feeling sorry for yourself and scrolling online, it's like, I'm going to call up some of my best friends and I'm going to do something. Instead of feeling like I'm isolated and alone, why not focus on those connections? Because that's what we came here to experience. And time again, I have our loved ones always say, these were the things that brought me the most happiness. And it was never something that they had or that they did or the checklist of things. It was the memories and the connections that they had. And that's it.
Yes. I love too how you mentioned that the regret or the sadness usually comes from those who have passed over, from either not forgiving or coming into a healthy relationship with the loved ones that they passed before those things were resolved.
Yeah.
And also giving someone their full attention. They weren't fully present, or they didn't appreciate or have the gratitude when they were there. It's like these are the subject matters that keep coming up, and how important it is to make those connections and to be fully present with someone. And it's like one of the greatest gifts that you can ever give someone is your 100% full attention.
That is
There
true.
is no greater gift than giving someone your full attention, not be thinking about other things that you got to do or go places you got to go or being on your phone, but just being fully present. Giving somebody all of your attention like that is so fulfilling
I just
to
want
the
to be
heart and the
loved.
soul. Yeah, we
Yeah.
just want to be loved. And so I find that so cool. So you would say that the lessons that you've learned spiritually with your relationships is to be 100% present.
Yeah.
To make sure that you make efforts to truly connect with those that you love, friends, family, building fun memories together through those connections. Another one is coming into remembrance for yourself has helped you remember who they are as well, and understanding that even though you may be feeling at times intense feelings, you realize that you're really so much bigger than that, and they're so much bigger than that. So it really deepens that connection and intimacy in relationships as well.
And the last thing I would add to that is also boundaries are needful.
And then the boundaries
are necessary.
They are.
And I'll tell you, when I have sessions, there's sometimes where maybe even just yesterday, where someone I was working with hadn't talked to her dad in a while. And he was very abusive, very emotionally abusive, alcoholic, all these heavy things. And her ancestor said, hey, we want to tell you that your boundaries are very healthy, and we know it's exactly what you need. And if you ever feel like it's not serving you anymore, then maybe it's time to open that back up. But there are times and there are people where sometimes we need a healthy distance so that it doesn't pull us away from our journey. And that doesn't mean you've given up or you don't care about them. And it's kind of counterproductive because we're taught you have to love everyone. Well, sometimes the best way to love someone is by having a proper distance or a proper boundary so that when you can be there with them, you can be fully present and love them instead of feeling over exuded, or your stress is overwhelmed, or you're around them and you don't want to be around them. Like, why not give it to yourself and that person to say, hey, I might need to take a little break, or I need to take a step back and focus on yourself for a little bit. But always know that like cutting someone off is totally different than having a healthy boundary. Cutting someone off, you're going to be left with grief, guilt if they pass. You're going to be like, why was I so selfish?
Regret's going to haunt you.
Yeah, but if you have this boundary where it's like, I love them and they know that I love them, but I need space for myself, it gives you also power within yourself. But when it comes to spiritual gifts, you have to have that self-power.
You do.
That was one thing, is when I got started, I am so grateful for my family. They're so supportive. And I use their support to keep me going. I would say, hey, I'm really nervous about this. And my sister would say, you're doing such a good job. You got this. And it was what I needed.
Wow.
And I also realized that I got wounded so much quicker because I didn't have that full grounding for myself. I was relying on their grounding, their choice of me, their support was my support. It was my strength. Instead of it being my strength, was my strength. Wow. And it was such an amazing lesson. And I'm so grateful for my supporters, my family, my husband. Oh my gosh, they're so supportive. And I feel for people who maybe are on the spiritual path and don't have the support that they would wish that they did. And I think that goes back into like, we came here to learn certain lessons. And I had my fair share of people that I was with, or friendships or relationships that weren't supportive. And I learned from that. And then I also said, I need something else. And that's just my journey. That might not be everyone's journey. But what I've loved is you and I have been doing a Gifts of the Spirit class. Well, you've been leading most of it, but I taught a little bit of it. And it was really helping the women really step into who they were and trusting that. And I remember we talked about all the different clairs, how you feel things, sensing, feeling, knowing. And then we also talked about like mediumship and then divination using cards or whatever it is that they might be drawn to. And it was so fun to see them stand in power on their own.
It was.
And to be ignited with fire because they stepped into that and they trusted themselves. And that's what we're called to do. And that's what spiritual gifts should be, is an exciting adventure, as well as finding people to help guide you to connect back into your space, to pull back your power and your strength.
I love that. I love how you brought that up, because a lot of people, when they think of developing their psychic gifts or gifts of spirit, they think of it as it's almost like a magic trick. It's something that they're just going to develop a tool and they just do it. They don't realize that the core of gifts of spirit is remembrance. It's really cultivating that inner connection to yourself first, and connecting in with your intuition and being provided tools and ways that you can do that, and strengthening that knowing. And then all of a sudden, guess what happens? All the channels start to open up.
Yeah.
And you're coming from that space because you're reconnected back into your multidimensional self, who you really are. And when you connect back into the true essence of who you are, it'll open up all those clairs. It will open up your mediumship. It will, and then it's just getting brave, like the process that you were talking about. It's like just getting brave and following that intuition and stepping out, taking a leap of faith and trusting that intuition. And the more you do it, the stronger it gets. It's just like a muscle.
Before you were physical, this spiritual connection was flowing through you. It was just who you were.
It's who you.
There's no separation. It's the body, it's the mind, it's the labels of society that make us put a block on it. We are spiritual gifts. We are spirit before anything.
Yep.
And that's been such a huge remembrance and a reminder. And I'm excited for us to kind of jump into your journey as well, which will be on the next podcast.
Yes.
Is we're going to be really diving in.
Part 2.
Yeah, we're going to be diving in and exploring about your journey. You know, we thought that we needed 2 different ones because there is so much to it. And I feel like we needed that time to dive in. And so I'm excited for us in this next part to talk about your journey as well.
Oh, I love that. And I just so enjoyed listening to you, Jen. I mean, you're such an inspiration.
Thank you.
You really are an angel on earth for me, and such a mirror back to me of wisdom, of love, of truth, of light, and of courage. You know, so thank you so much for
that means so much
sharing your gifts. Yes.
Thank you. I received that.
Take it all in.
Yes, absolutely.